Alright guys, HyDra again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. Kylo Ken is officially back in action after getting slammed by Kremp in a series of 8s last night. Few choice words for his future in the CDL, or lack of it, as Kenny seems to believe. Could Kenny be proved wrong on this one though, especially with many teams expected to make moves after Major 1? Kremp should theoretically be right at the top of some of their lists. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to dive into. Firstly, of course, the confirmation yesterday that Gamebattles is dead. Well, I logged in this morning and I can still kind of log in, but I don't think I can post a game or anything. The site is basically open now, but actually coinciding with this, FaZe confirmed yesterday they will be the new home for COD Challengers. So this is good. Of all the options to kind of run it for the scene, FaZe definitely, well, up there among the best, if not the best that COD could have got. Now, I don't really know why it took so long. There were rumours that because Miami couldn't really make up their minds whether they were going to do a Challengers event at their major or not, there was a bit of a delay to the Challengers announcement. And sure, there's going to be less majors, unfortunately, or less opens tournaments on LAN for the Challenger players than we would like to see, but FaZe are going to run the show from now onwards. That was confirmed yesterday. We also saw some classic Gamebattles profiles going around. This was Envoy's, right, you know, just showing off the trophies that he's won during the era. I always kind of find it interesting to see when the players joined, because my account, I think I made it in like 2015, something like that. So, you know, an Envoy 2014, Clay's was made back in, I think, it's either 2005 or 2007, I can't quite remember, but basically right when Gamebattles started, Clay had an account. TJ's, I think, is kind of incredible, given the fact that TJ, despite the fact that he's been around forever, is still a pretty young player. Like, I think he's only like 24, and he made his account back in 2010, so he was, what, 10 years old when he made his account, and like, I mean, he was an absolute chief grinder back in the day. I mean, look at the amount of Modern Warfare 3, Black Ops 1, and like Black Ops 2 GBs that he played. I just find it remarkable how TJ was literally like a tiny little kid. There's even some crazy gameplays. I think there's Nameless Clutches a 1v4. I don't think you guys have ever seen this. There's a video on YouTube, Nameless Clutches a 1v4 on Express Search and Destroy, something like that. And I think Huskers is on the other team that he clutches it against, who's now the Warzone guy. And then he was playing with TJ or Toast or whatever he was going by at the time. I think it was still TJ at that point. And this was on Black Ops 2 when TJ was about 12 or 13, right? So of course he's got all the pro points and the trophies from the more like modern day, but lots of the records are on, you know, MW3, Black Ops 2, stuff like this. Other players have it slightly differently. Of course, Doug tweeted his hat as well. So yeah, it was kind of nice to see. And look, Doug joined in 2011, which was later than TJ Alley joined, which I think is kind of remarkable. Also, there's been some snow. I mean, there's actually snow at the moment here in Manchester in the UK as well, but also in Texas. I know that, again, it's, you guys probably remember a couple of years ago when there was that snowstorm in Texas and we had to do the Super Week, right? Because all the online matches couldn't happen because all the internet lines went down, electricity was out, and it was all the shambles. And last year, there was also problems with the weather in January, early February, that affected travel to Boston. I believe the weather in Boston is actually looking rather milder than it would be expected for, especially when it was last year, when the major happened in a week and a half. But we know that Scump has said that they are going to go, that they're committed to going and doing the watch party in person in Boston. That is the plan. But last year, they were going to do exactly the same thing. You guys probably remember, Scump had retired after Raleigh before the Boston major, so there was all the talk about, you know, would Scump do the watch party in person, what was going to happen. They were planning to, and then everything, well, the weather played havoc with it, all the flights got cancelled, didn't happen, but maybe better for that to happen now than in a week and a half, when quite possibly there could be some travel disruption, but hopefully not for everyone that's going to be heading out there. But speaking of Kenny, obviously he's on the OpTic team now. I saw some pretty funny tweets here from Hitch over the weekend. You guys remember when, during that game 5 against Vegas, they were up like 3-1, 4-1, and Kenny was just laughing. You know, this is what he does, always has a good time at the game vibes, and for the last several years, that's been primarily against OpTic, right? Many a time on the Los Angeles Thieves, Kenny will be, you know, laughing, giggling with his team during a hard point, or especially after one, or during a final map search and destroy, and that's always been a point of like, oh my god, this Kenny, I can't believe that he's acting in this way. Nowadays, he's doing it for OpTic. There's, you know, obviously it's a pleasure for the Green Wall to enjoy that, and to be fair, Kenny, on average, has probably been OpTic's best player so far. Maybe the stats don't necessarily paint that picture. You're probably going to lean Pred's way, who is also very much a candidate in that discussion, but I would say in terms of impact and everything, Kenny's been, I would say, the most valuable player for that team so far, but not like Shotzzy's been bad. He's been holding his own, I think, and Dashy's an interesting one, because I think he always gets criticised one way or another. If he gets a load of kills and they don't win or something, then he gets criticised, and if he doesn't actually play too many kills, but is doing all the objective work, then people say, oh, Dashy's Dashy's fallen off, he's not dropping the numbers. So I don't really understand it either way. I think Dashy's been playing perfectly fine as well. But I would say their best 2 players so far have been Kenny and Pred in terms of raw impact. And, well, Kenny's obviously been a massive part of the reason why they've had good success so far. And let's not forget, Kenny and Pred, both the new players to the team. If they'd have kept Ghosty around, as many believed should have happened, well, that might not have worked out too well based on the evidence that we are presently seeing. However, Kenny was up to action in 8s over the last couple of days and finds himself in this particular spot. So, you know, Temp's on the other team, or Temp's on his team, Scrapp's on his team, Dashy's on the other team, and this is Kremp, of course. So Kremp was in the league last season, right, on the Boston Breach. They made all those changes. Kremp was one of them that eventually came into the team, and I think he held his own somewhat, especially in Control. You guys probably remember that Kremp was a bit of a monster, actually, in the Control game mode, especially on LS Elo, had a few very standout maps. The rest of the time, though, wasn't exactly spectacular. And look, Kremp is right now out of the league again. But in fairness, he is on the best challenger team in FaZe Black, and they are looking very good. And, you know, the belief is probably that Kremp was approached by the Carolina Royal Ravens whether he wanted to sub in. That's what we believe, at least, that when they couldn't get Real because of the visa stuff, they reached out to several players, including FaZe Black, to say, look, do you guys want to sub in for Real? They said no, and they'd prefer to, you know, bide their time, wait for a better opportunity. And fair enough, maybe they saw that Ravens are the worst team in the league and therefore nothing positive happens from subbing in for them. But given the current state of the league itself, if teams want to make permanent changes, not just a temporary substitute, then players like Kremp should be near the top of the discussion, especially because they are primarily SMG players, or at least Kremp can run the SMG effectively, which is often what teams need, or is one thing that can be quite difficult to find. So this particular clip, I do find it funny how the trash talk always happens after you've just got slammed, right? Because Kenny here, like, the guy jumps over his head, gets the kill, and then shoots his body a little bit, and then Kenny kind of, you know, goes off at him.
Are you kidding me?
Top red on me, top red, top red. Top red, Kremp, top red, one shot. You are horrendous. You'll never be back in the league again, I promise you. That's a guarantee. You absolutely shitter.
So Kenny does respond to this and say, look, those 8s, they bring out the toxicness, right? The toxicity is going next level when you have, you know, in that kind of circumstance. Maybe, obviously, there's this one specific moment where Kenny gets slammed, but who knows? Maybe for the last map or so, he's been having a difficult time against Kremp, making some interesting plays, and then all of a sudden he gets killed like this one time, and then he goes off at him, right? So you're never going to be in the CDL again and all this type of stuff. Now, look, whether Kenny is going to try and go out of his way to use the Friendship League powers to prevent Kremp from getting in the league, I don't know. But Kremp was in the league last year. I'm sure he did play against Kenny a little bit when he was in the CDL, because he was on Boston. Kenny, of course, was on Los Angeles Thieves towards the end of last season. But do you think Kenny is going to get proven right on this subject as time progresses? Because I can definitely see a world right now with lots of speculation around potential roster changes that Kremp is one of the chief candidates to get signs by a CDL team. This is the FaZe Black team at the moment. Asim is probably considered the roster's best player, and, you know, I would expect that Asim will get offers after Major 1, if not quite possibly before. We talked about yesterday the possibility of some of these teams deciding, you know what, we might need to preempt roster changes post Major 1 by doing it now, because otherwise, you know, let's say a team like maybe Surge, if they struggle at Major 1, or even like a Boston, if they struggle at Major 1, is, you know, needing potential changes, they would be far more attractive teams to go to than a Ravens, a Rocker potentially. Maybe Rocker isn't so bad because they seem to have some degree of ambition with G2 coming into play. Obviously, it's a debate, right? Especially if you're a player like Asim and you think that you might get multiple offers over the next few weeks. Brack also should be in consideration, and it's not just like these are the only top guys in challenges, but these are certainly some of them. But Brack more of an AR player. Kremp certainly can run an SMG if required for a team, and did a pretty respectable slaying job, I thought, on that Boston Breach roster. This was his numbers, or this was his Slyman cards for his full season last year. Played 15 series for the Boston Breach, and it was respectable enough. His control was actually pretty good, and then, sure, fell off a little bit. But overall, it wasn't too bad. Given that Boston team was kind of struggling towards the end, I think Kremp relatively well held his own, and, you know, with a second stint in the league somewhere else, could be an impactful player. I don't think he was terrible. You know, is he a player that could do what happened to GodRx? GodRx comes back in, has a very hard time. It's definitely possible that Kremp doesn't, you know, struggles back in the league, and Kenny doesn't seem to think that he's particularly good. But I think that he will be a consideration for some of these rosters looking to make changes. What teams could those be? Because as, Tweezy here and others have said, FaZe Black right now would beat Rock. I mean, how good would that FaZe Black team be? Would they be, 12th? Would they be 9th? Would they be 8th? Like, I think it's possible they beat several of these teams right now, and therefore, understandably, their players will be in consideration, right? So I would not be surprised if Kremp, after the major, I think it's more likely than not, very marginally, that he ends up back in the league somewhere after Major 1. I can definitely see any of 3 or 4 teams at the bottom looking for an SMG upgrade in some regards, and they might look at Kremp over Exceed if a Seam is already taken potentially, but also a Seam and Clay, let's just say theoretically Ravens wanted to change and they wanted to stick with Gwyn and Clay is probably what they would do. GodRx probably is going to step away at some point from their roster or be forced out basically, and then Real, whether he's there or not, you've got TJ, but you might want another Slayer, more slaying SMG option in that category. Maybe Kremp could fit in there because we don't know if a Seam and Clay would get on because, back in the Cold War days, they had a bit of friction, I believe, during that season, so not necessarily sure if they'd want to run that back. And of course, knowing me, I'm very much, eyes open for the potential storyline that Kremp does get back into the league somewhere, then plays against OpTic, Texas at some particular event and, does rather well. To be honest, in previous seasons, I would have said this was somewhat more likely because this game, there is clearly a skill gap between the best teams and the rest teams. These standings aren't even updated, by the way, so I don't know why I'm showing them, but they kind of do tell the same picture as what we've currently seen. But because of the skill gap we're seeing, it is more challenging for upset victories to happen if Kremp was to join, Legion or Rocker or something like that, even Boston maybe, but I kind of see that as very doubtful. Them beating OpTic is pretty unlikely, maybe compared to how it's been for the last couple of years, but I do prefer the league like this when it's more top-heavy because, sure, the league matches will be kind of dull, but when an upset does happen, as they will, they're more impactful, and because there actually is a skill gap, there's no excuse for the top teams, and the majors are going to be spectacular, seeing these teams go to war, basically. Speaking of some of the players, though, that might need to potentially be replaced, GodRx here, of course, is one of them. I thought these stats were interesting. This was back in the 2020 season when he was playing on the Minnesota Rocket. His online stats were respectable, okay, 1.1, 1.1, 0.9, something like that. On LAN, he was an absolute monster. So I don't know if Carolina will think in the back of their head, let's just let GodRx play at LAN to see what he can do. But as I mentioned before, the problem is this season, there's only 4 LANs, unless you're including champs, which Carolina probably won't qualify for on current evidence. So there's only 4 LANs, there are 28 online qualifiers. So GodRx is probably a player that will do better on LAN than online, but he's just been so bad online that his online, you can't imagine that on LAN he's going to be frying precisely, and if you're starting in losers round 1, then you make the things so much more difficult for yourself. So we'll see if he even makes it to the LAN. I think it's definitely possible either way, but I do think that regardless of Kenny's words, it is definitely plausible that Kremp finds himself back in the league at some point or another, unless he knows something that we most certainly don't. So very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.